Okay, ready? Let's start. So these things that are coming around are, one of them's the Herbal Energetics, which we're going to start talking about a bit more now. So you can take it and just read it. And the other one is the instructions that we give to our interns about the experiential journal where you're sitting with the plant, and some things to think about and to notice and observe. And we have them journal about it, which is a great technique. So if you feel inclined to journal when you're sitting with your plant this week, feel free, because what I've noticed is you might know things and learn things, but you don't really know them and learn, like you learn them in a whole different way than when you write about them. And then it's really yours. It's something about the writing process that solidifies it. So we're always like receiving impressions all day long. But when you write about those impressions, even briefly, it's like those ones you always remember, you know? I remember when we did, like when I first was uncovering some lavender, very early on in the year, this year, sometime in like late March. And when I uncovered it, it had this really beautiful color, like the color of like aquamarine, like Caribbean blue. And it's really the only time that the foliage has that color is when you take the mulch off it in the very, very first part of the springtime. And just like, it's something about that struck me because I was uncovering a lot of it and just enjoying that color. And it was no more complex than that. And then I wrote about it. And now I always have a relationship to that phenomenon and that experience with that plant. And it's pretty cool. Very simple thing to appreciate, just the fact that the young lavender has the color of aqua blue. But for me, it was just like something now that like feels sort of in there somewhere. And when we do this each week with a different plant and a different aspect of a different plant, especially the one that we've decided to kind of like hook up with and ally with, the experience gets very deep with that plant over 7-8 months, you know. So you notice, like I've chosen Ma Huang or ephedra. I didn't show you that today, but as the plant that I want to observe this season. And it's like one of the slowest growing, somewhat non-eventful plants you could ever choose. It grows like a grass. It's a very old plant. It's almost more like a spore-bearing plant than a seed-bearing plant. It takes a long time to grow, and so like seemingly nothing's happening. And you know, no like fireworks like the angelica and pollination and all this stuff, just these green stalks, you know, now for 2 months. But I've noticed that if I sit with it openly for 15 minutes and really take in what's really occurring, every single time I get deep insights into the nature of that plant. And I notice things that are microscopic. You know what I mean? But that's how you meet a plant, is to get down to that level. We're just different. You know, our nervous systems are like going fast, and everything about a plant, generally speaking, is going very slow. And so it's a great exercise, and you'd be surprised how much you can learn from this. And how much you can just feel appreciation and other things besides what you can learn intellectually. You feel things doing this exercise that you can't feel just talking about a plant and what it does and how it affects you and all this other kind of stuff. That's what the point of having a farm is. Part of it is this you can't connect to this stuff in jars in that same way. So it's very interesting. So just check out the guidelines and see what you think, and that's just to help you along. And I'm just going to jump into whatever. I think I'm going to jump into this bouquet. So, does anybody know what these all have in common and why we chose to do it? Well, you're both right. Carminatives, kitchen herbs, after lunch topic. Because I don't want anyone nodding off, damaging my ego. Look at this thing. We're going to pass these around, okay? and talk about them. And I have many jars of carminatives here to talk about. And then I will talk about more about how to meet a plant. And then we'll talk about, which will include more of the 5 elements, which will include more of the tastes, and so on and so forth. We're going to try tinctures now. We're going to just get into it. And then we're going to make a chamomile infused oil and drink chamomile tea and rub chamomile infused oil all over us and smell Floricopia chamomile oil. It's just going to be crazy. So this is the Angelica, and these many, many seeds, and this isn't, a carminative, like David was saying, is technically, it means an agent that helps one to expel gas and relieve pain, or the pain that results from too much gas, or flatus. But we can get much more detailed about what this represents, and what it means, and how the mechanism of action by which this occurs. And so Angelica is not, you don't see this much in the kitchen, but in medieval times and in Europe and so forth, they definitely were using this in the kitchen a lot. So it's a very interesting flavor, and it was often used to flavor liqueurs and stuff like that. Still is, candies, confections. It's got a very unique flavor. It's pungent. Now there's 6 main flavors that we can talk about. Pungent, bitter, salty, sweet, bland, astringent, sour. 7. So we got 7. A lot of systems don't talk about bland as a taste, but in traditional Chinese medicine, bland's pretty important taste, especially in what it does. So sweet, astringent, sour, bitter, salty, bland, and pungent. So 7. Got them?
Sweet, astringent, sour, bland, pungent, salty.
Technically, this is the way I like to do it because we can experience these directly. I mean, you can group these things in different ways, and in like Cherokee medicine and so forth, they would maybe take pungent and break it up into acrid, like echinacea is kind of acrid, spilanthes is kind of acrid. But a lot of systems would call those things bitter and pungent. But acrid, lobelia, kind of acrid. So where do you put it? It's nothing like cayenne or ginger in terms of its overall energetic felt sense. So anyway, there's different ways to do that. And but what I have here to experience, you'll get to experience directly all of those tastes.
It's in your notes, the
Yeah.
energetics notes, you just got all the taste.
But angelica seed, like the root, is pungent, spicy. And many of the carminatives are pungent and spicy. And many of the carminatives are on your spice rack. They're seeds. And in fact, a lot of the seeds that we use in our spice rack are all in the same family, the Apiaceae family, the Umbelliferae family, which is related to celery, carrot, lovage, and this is no exception. And so cumin, coriander, fennel, these are all the same basic family. Celery seed, dill. So it's kind of interesting just to notice that. This is something about noticing plant families and how they all have commonalities in them. So I'm going to pass this around, and feel free to take another green seed. These aren't quite ripe. And experience it. Now here's the thing about this. I wrote this in the little handout. If you were a Neanderthal, no, we talked about this the other day. I said Neanderthal from Africa. He said Neanderthals weren't in Africa. I said I meant an Australopithecus Neanderthal sapiens. No, I'm just kidding. Just imagine, our species is very, the Homo genus is essentially, 1 million years old. Just imagine, right? We've only got written history for such a, 10 8,000 years, 9,000 years, right? Not even. Not written, but just history where we can say it's even history. But think of the span of time that we've been around as like a species and how we've interacted with plants all of that time. We're no different physiologically than we've been for 100,000 years. So there's been people like us who are intelligent and who sang and danced and made art and thought about things, and they're no different than us. Now, the contextual and philosophical systems that we classify herbal medicine into are unique, and they're, there's Ayurveda, and there's Chinese medicine, and there's Unani medicine, there's Greek medicine, and there's a whole wide range of indigenous ways of sort of conceptualizing herbal medicine. But at a fundamental level, and this is why I'm so excited about this subject, is that if you think about the fact that this is folk medicine, that this medicine is older than all of those systems, it's because we're really the same ultimately, and the plants are the same. So they're the same, and our physiology is the same. And there's a way of communicating with each other that bypasses completely all of the intellectual paradigms and all of the sort of conceptual systems that we have in place. And then once we get to that level, we start from that level, then we move outward from that level, then the conceptual systems get very, very useful. It's like, starting with something blunt and then sharpening it, so then it becomes very useful. But if we jump to that, then we miss something very important, which is really why this medicine is for the people, which is it's highly empowering to be able to utilize your own senses and your own physiology to understand the world around us. And it applies to herbal medicine. And it also basically is how we come to biological unity and the concept of interdependence, interrelatedness of all of these things. Like David was talking about today, the elements in the plants balancing or interacting with the vital force, the prana within us, and then that creating something else that goes on, another phenomenon. But it's all interconnected and continuous, how this is occurring. So, I remember when I was in college, and I worked in I studied anthropology, medical anthropology in college, and I worked in a primate lab at one point. I had to do that for a semester, and I would hang out with the monkeys. I told you guys this story, right? Did I? I used to hang out with the monkeys in this primate lab. These, not rhesus monkeys. I can't remember which kind they were at this point. But it was this room, no windows, just a concrete room, and there was a cage, and there was a whole troop of monkeys in there. And I was supposed to go in there with a data sheet and like check off how many times they scratched each other and picked each other's ear and, copulated and all this stuff. And that was good for about 2 weeks of that course. And then I was alone in this room, like with the monkeys, thinking, check, 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 check. I was like, okay, this is, crazy. What are these poor monkeys? I'm like, we formed a relationship, and I just kind of God, we gotta open the door, get some sun in here for you monkeys. Don't you want to know what it's like out there? I can't believe this. I'd go outside, I'd bring in some snow, I'd make a snowball, I'd give it to the monkeys, see what they do with it. I would bring in all kinds of stuff, actually. I mean, I was all by myself. I was hoping that the professors wouldn't find me doing all this stuff. But you're literally in this room thinking what a ridiculous thing to do, I mean, if you're going to be a primatologist, you can do this on paper. You don't even need to be doing it in a room with, these caged animals. But at one point, I brought in some food. I'd bring in, all they had was I don't know what, monkey meal. But it wasn't really that great. And I'd bring in some fruit. And I'd be like, here's some fruit, And I got to know my favorite monkeys, And I'd give one to this and I'd watch. And so I knew this beforehand, but I wanted to test my own knowledge of this. But when you give a monkey something new or a primate something new that they didn't know about, that they've never tried before, they'll kind of just go like this. They'll sniff it for a while and look at it for quite some time. And then eventually they'll just open their mouth and put it in their mouth and just sit there. And they won't chew it, they just let it sit there. Now, I knew that that happened before I did this experiment, but what this represented to me was this is how plants communicate with us. This is how we and the plants ultimately communicate and learned to communicate, was more or less this type of activity. Because the cascade of chemistry that is released through taste and scent and all the other senses, but those ones, are of particular significance, is direct transmission of information from the plant to the being. And, they taste this thing, and it's, oh, that's bitter. That's not going to be like something I want to have a whole bunch of, And then they taste this thing, and it's, it tastes really sweet. It's like, mushy, like a banana. I think I'll try a little more. Maybe I'll swallow a tiny bit and see what happens to me, And then just wait. And that's, if that's your mode of living, then that's what you'd have to do. But the thing is, we can get back to that and experience that at a very fundamental level, and it's extremely empowering. Because then it takes this whole concept of herbal medicine out of the realm of the experts and brings it right down to your spice rack. And if you can start to understand it at this level, it becomes something that's easily integratable and not so mysterious and easy to give to, at a fundamental level, easy to sort of like, I guess I just said it basically, just integrate into your everyday life. And then what you do is once you've understood this part of it thoroughly, that's when all the context really, really helps. So does that make sense, basically? Mm-hmm. So basically then, with those tastes in mind, and the fact that those tastes ultimately derive from first the elements, then they're broken down into the qualities. The qualities are really descriptive terms to describe the nature of those elements. And then the tastes are comprised essentially of the qualities. And ultimately the tastes contain the elements, but you can ascertain the usefulness of these tastes or what they might do in physiology by the nature of their attributes. So like the attributes, the 20 gunas, did you guys talk about that? I was out for a little bit. So let's just pass around this Angelica and take a green seed and try it, right? And we'll talk, I told you already, there's some pungent taste in here. There's also other tastes in here. And of course, because they all contain all the different elements in differing proportions. What you'll find is when we're dealing as an herbalist with herbs, one of the first and most important descriptive ways to describe herbs is through taste, temperature, moisture, and direction. These are kind of the map of what an herb's going to do as it interacts with your physiology. And that's a traditional way of describing herbal medicine's effects that many of the great systems share in common. And it's in your handout. And I'm going to get into this more, but I want to pass this around. So you can look at this stuff later, but I'll be able to just keep rolling with these thoughts, and I'll get around to everything that I'm opening up eventually. Now, when we start to taste these things, and David, I'm sure, is going to talk about this when it comes to how we smell essential oils, and when we try these tinctures, this is to bring this, again, out of the realm of conceptual and right down into the realm of experiential. So there's a way of doing this where you taste whatever we're going to taste and just let it wash over you and experience it directly. All right? So experience what's happening, what's occurring, as directly as you can at the level of sensation. If the mind comes in, which it will, and says, I hate this thing, or why do you give me this thing? What is this thing? Is this poisonous? Whatever it might be that comes in there, just let it go and continue to stay with the experience to the best of your ability. And, this is kind of the modus operandi that we use in this program in general on this farm. this is one of the contemplative ways of experiencing taste and temperature and moisture level and directionality directly in your own physiology, so that what you're then doing when you're giving it to someone else, or if you're sort of wondering about, many, many aspects of this, it's coming from direct experience, direct body memory. And you'll find out just from this short, however long I have, 45 minutes, you'll learn an enormous amount this way. So just let it wash over you, and then we can talk about some of its qualities. So I'll pass it around and give that a try. Angelica.
May I ask you a question?
Yeah.
When you say direction, can you tell me?
Well,
When you say moisture, taste, temperature, direction?
yeah, I'm going to get into that.
Oh, you will.
I just wanted to give you the sort of instructions on how to experience this stuff, how to pay attention to it first. Now, normally, because I have to keep talking, because otherwise nothing will be said. And we could sit here with so we could sit here with one of these things, and we could sit with it and unpack it for quite some time. Just experiencing it as a flavor, as a phenomenon. And it really should be something that you take time with. And this is the idea in general. As we study this, we're going to give you the concepts and the tools. But then when you're in your daily life working with herbs, hopefully you can spend a lot of time with this. So this is how it becomes a practice. This is how herbal medicine can become a practice. It's a contemplative practice, a meditative discipline to stay with your own body and your own senses as you're working with these things, whether you're out in the garden just hanging out with them, observing them, whether you're tasting them, whether you're smelling them, with the practice's general goal to bring us to a sense of interconnectedness. This path, basically, of herbalism can take you all the way. And it's actually a path we need more now than ever, that people take seriously. That's why people get so excited about it, don't you think? I mean, I suppose you can sit here with lettuce and do the same thing, or, whatever, tomato. But there's something very special about herbal medicine. And like I said, if you practice this becomes second nature. And then you understand, for example, in that pungent taste, do you feel the spreading nature? Do you feel the sharpness? In terms of the attributes, the qualities, do you feel the intensity on your tongue? Do you feel it is more heavy, condensing, or more subtle and light? Heavy. Interesting. Why heavy?
Because of the intensity, it gives me a heavy feeling.
Well, here's you brought up a good point. It's technically wouldn't be classified as heavy, but that's because this is all relative. So you'd have to try something heavy to get the heavy sensation. But that's also why it's a practice, because we all have to hone our capabilities to actually sense things in this way, which is, brand new, and we're doing it in 2 seconds when it really needs long periods of time. What else do you feel? Spice?
Yeah.
So now spice is a descriptive term. Well, that's still a descriptive term. So before we get to flavor, and before we get to the descriptive terms like, is that helpful? Or is it too loud? Whatever.
I'm okay.
Okay, ready? So back to it. Before you get to the spicy part, or the bitter taste and all that kind of stuff, those are descriptive terms, but what does it feel like to your body, to your tongue?
Numbing my tongue.
Anesthetic feeling, it's numbing, tingling. Great.
Reminds me of Scalantes.
Okay, so it has some association with it. Still, what does it feel like?
Stinging.
Feels hot. There you go. You can feel the heat. So what does that indicate?
Fire.
It indicates fire. It indicates circulation. It indicates maybe some nerve excitation, maybe some irritation slightly. All of those things are potentially there. Medium red. I was talking to Sarah. So we've got some like pungency, we've got some numbness, we've got some spreading, we've got some intensity. Now, at a very basic level, right? Okay, we're going to pass around the Angelica oil now to follow this. And we'll notice the same, you can do the same thing with your mouth as you can do with the oil, with your nose. You can taste, you can experience directly. See if you can experience some of the same qualities in the oil that you just experienced in your tongue. And notice actually, ever since I've hooked up with David, I've actually noticed that my nose is actually more reliable than my mouth in terms of like understanding plant medicine in many, many ways. It's actually remarkable to reawaken that atrophied sense. It's been actually a great gift. So now, let me ask you this. Would you want like a bowl full of these for breakfast? With some milk and cereal? Right. Well, how do you know that?
Little bit of
Right. You can already sense it's powerful. It's strong. It's got qualities that, thanks, that you know just from one seed have a potential potency, right? So you're evolving past the chimps right now into what's next? After the chimp, after the monkeys, what's after that? Whatever, you get the point. The point is, like, just with that one bit of information, look how much you can learn. You take one seed, and we know already something about the power and the utility of this herb. That's important. That's like, no one had to tell you anything about that. It was just one seed that told you stuff. Now, as it's in your mouth, it slowly makes its way down into your stomach, and there's more effects that are going to go on there. So the longer you sit with this, and the more you're able to perceive it, the more you'll be able to feel it working at other levels of your physiology. What do you think of that one? Can anyone detect a flavor in here besides pungency? Sweet. It does have some sweetness, doesn't it? Can you notice how you can experience a taste just through smelling in that way? It's interesting, isn't it?
It's like chamomile.
It's very interesting. Sweetness in there. All right, so basically that's what I wanted to tell you. Now let's pass around another one. Let's pass around this one. Now you can take a little nibble, you can smell it. Feel free. There you go. Melissa. Just look at people's faces when they smell it. That tells you something. Actually, it's important when it comes to diagnosis. You have to pay attention to everything you possibly can. So lots of people's faces, when they had the seed, right, there was some mixed faces. Some of it might be constitutional, but in general, some people were, or like, whoa, this is, wait a second, whoa. But when they smell the Melissa, a lot of people are sort of just, I can handle it, yeah.
So going with what David was talking about earlier, like we're attracted to our own poisons.
Yeah.
So if there was something that we're put off by, would that say that it's a good medicine for us then? Something that we need?
Not necessarily. One of the concepts in traditional diagnosis is that you can, if you're grossly out of balance, for example, the more grossly out of balance you are, the more you tend to crave, or they say perverted cravings. Cravings that make you more out of balance. But the more that you're sort of temperate, and you're sort of, your Vikriti and Prakriti are kind of pretty much closely aligned with one another, the more you can perceive subtlety, the more you would tend to crave the things that are appropriate. So hopefully no one in here after that herb walk was craving hot ginger tea. And everyone was happy when there was iced peppermint tea. But someone, I mean, commonly in the clinic, people come in and they're like, you know, they're smoking 2 packs a day, and they're craving coffee, and they're craving staying up late, and they're craving all the wrong things. You'd think they'd be craving like jogging and salad and stuff, but they're not. So that's the nature of how it works. And that's also got to do with the yin and yang of it all.